Okay, we're here today amongst 4 Japanese plums, the variety Santa Rosa. Japanese plums are very vigorous by their genetic nature. Santa Rosas are at the top of that chart in terms of vigor. Unfortunately, unlike apples, there are no effective dwarfing rootstocks with stone fruits, particularly plums. The rootstock these 4 trees are on is a rootstock called citation, and it is considered to be semi-dwarfing, and it imparts about 50% dwarfing. So we have trees that are 15, 16 feet tall. If they were on a full-size rootstock, they'd be double that. I'm not wild about 15, 16-foot trees. So our goal here with summer pruning is to reduce the height of the tree. This is pretty easily accomplished, and it can be done actually in truth in summer or winter, but we're here today in summer and we're going to do that. Let me pause here for a second and tell you about, there's actually 2 heights to a fruit tree. Okay, you say, what? 2 heights to a tree? Well, yeah. There's the actual height of the tree. If we look up here, we see that by the tips of the branches. But then there's the more important height of the tree, what I call the effective height of the tree. And let me show you where that is on this tree, and let me tell you about it. The effective height of this tree is from about right here, and about 7, 8 feet tall, down to about waist high, 3+ feet. And that is to say, almost all of the fruit on this tree is born in this area. And let me take that a little further. Almost all of the fruit on the tree, which you can get at for both thinning and picking, is born in this area. So you've got an area maybe 7, 8 feet up to down 3.5, 4 feet tall that comprises the effective height of the tree. And that's what I'm most concerned about. And what I'm most concerned about is, as always with fruit trees, is there enough sunlight penetrating into the core of the tree to keep this fruit wood lively and productive? And you just need to be looking after that at all times as you go throughout the year and over the years. And what this usually means, especially with vigorous trees such as these Santa Rosa plums, is that you're going to do a lot of summer pruning, and that pruning will be essentially with thinning cuts. So you can bring down the height of the tree, and as importantly, create good spacing horizontally around the tree between the upright branches that allows sunlight infall into the center core of the tree. Okay, let's do a little reverse engineering with this summer pruning to reduce the height of vigorous plum trees. Here we have a finished product. The height has been brought down from about 15 feet to 11, 12 feet. Again, the effective height less than that, 7 or 8 feet. And I did it through making a series of thinning cuts. Let me show you where I made the cuts. right here. And you can see by the girth of the stub that this was a very vigorous upright branch, went up another 8 or 10 feet. So I thinned it to here, and I left this weaker replacement. And when I say weak, that is not a pejorative term. That is good. This is weaker. Weaker equals more fruitful. Weaker also means staying in bounds, not going off and growing great guns. Let me just point along this run here and just say that this section of branch is laden with fruit buds, and by virtue of having fruit buds on this branch, that will sync up the tree's energy and keep it from growing off at a pace you don't want. So I made a thinning cut here, and this is also called cutting to weakness. That is, I thinned the branch at this point and I cut to a suitable weak replacement. Let's characterize that weak replacement again. It cants out to the side a little bit. It's not straight up. It is inherently less vigorous. It is laden with fruit buds. Let's go back to that first point, canting out to the side at an angle. Again, remembering that upright growth is vegetatively vigorous. As growth goes towards horizontal, it becomes less vegetatively vigorous and more fruitful. So it's a whole lot embedded in this branch. In summation, it's a good choice. So let's look at this unpruned Santa Rosa plum. Let's look at the actual height of the tree. Wow, it's a good 15, 18 feet tall. Too tall in several respects. One is too tall in terms of ease of getting at it and safety, but very much also too tall in terms of the top of the tree with its vigor. The closeness of the horizontal spacing of the branches is such that it is casting a dense shade, again down into what I call the effective height of the tree, from about 8 feet down to about 3.5, 4 feet. So there's work to be done. Before I pick up my tools, and certainly before I make a single cut, I want to look at and assess this tree and come up with a couple simple goals for this pruning session. So let's do that in increments around this tree. Let's look at this segment of the tree right now. Let me make some comments about it. It's too tall, and there are too many vigorous branches too close to one another horizontally. The net result, it's too tall, hard to get at, and the closeness of the branches is creating too much shade in the interior, more effective fruit-bearing portion of this tree. So you come up with a set of simple goals, and then you execute those as you move around the tree, and you see what that looks like. In truth, I don't exactly know what I'm going to do with this tree in the sense of down to a great degree of certainty right now, but I have a fairly good idea. And as I come up with a plan, a couple, 3 simple goals, and as I start to execute these cuts, you get what I call visual resolution. And you just see it. It's like you're catching the spirit. You got it. You got the beat. Let's go. All right, let me talk to you a little more here. So in this section here, I'm going to simply thin out this fork here. I'll make some secondary cuts up here, what I call thinning to weakness or cutting to weakness. I'm going to leave this branch, and I'm going to thin everything around and above it. That's it. Like I said, it's important not to do too much at any one pruning session. Do a little, take a step back, pause, reevaluate, and see if you want to take another step. Sometimes you have to just walk away. It's easy to say, it's so hard to do, but there'll be more opportunities in the future. Don't take too much off a tree in one session. Let's go around and look at a couple other components of the tree in a similar fashion, and then let's get busy with our saws. All right, here we are circumnavigating this tree, not the globe, but the tree, moving around the tree, assessing each segment for what are the pruning needs. Again, keeping in mind, although it sounds Orwellian, less is more. And what I mean by that is having a shorter tree with more sunlight penetration into the core will give you higher quality fruit, bigger and higher quality fruit. Whether it's the home grower and bragging rights in the neighborhood, or if you're selling your fruit, people prize big fruit. So, if we look here at this section of the tree, and this is the beauty of it. If a tree is well formed, and this tree has been well formed through incremental pruning over 5 or 6 years, what you're doing on one branch or one section of the tree is essentially identical to what you're doing on all the others. So let's give it a look. Here again we have a tree that's too tall with branches that are too close together. I want to step it down. And I'm going to do that with a series of a few cuts. One will be a simple saw thinning cut right in here. So I'll take this whole wing of the tree out. And then when we look at this other wing of it, I'm going to prise, thus keep this, and prise, and then thus keep this. Everything else is going to be thinned out. So that will give me greater horizontal spacing in this area. It'll give me shorter branch extensions. And again, the branches I've chosen to keep are laden with fruit buds. Fruit is good. That's why we're growing these trees. But the other thing again is that the presence of fruit buds and fruit on a tree will slow its vegetative extension growth. Or at the next section of the tree, let's analyze and come up with an action plan. Let's look at this area here. I'm going to keep this branch, grow it up and out into the sunlight here. I like it because of its placement, again, growing up and out into the sunlight, but I also like it because it's of moderate vigor and it speaks to fruitfulness. As I move into this area, it's a double negative and you shouldn't use it, but ain't nothing I like about this tree here. Let's thin this branch here. I'm going to thin this out in its entirety and keep aspects of this. The aspects of this that I'm going to keep are 1 and 2. I'll make a thinning cut right here. Let's look a little further over here. I'm going to keep this extension here. It's young, not too vigorous, and again growing up and out into the light. And then I'm going to keep this wing here, but cut it back a little bit, maybe 3 or 4 feet from the top. Let's also look at the bottom of this tree here. I have a lot of what are called rootstock suckers here. That is shoots that are growing not from the scion or the bearing portion of the tree, which will give me quality fruit, but shoots that are growing from the rootstocks, which will not produce either fruit or quality fruit, so I'm going to thin them out. Again, some rootstocks, in this instance citation, are notorious for throwing rootstock suckers on an annual basis, so you'll be doing this every year. Another example of such a situation would be the rootstock M7 for apples. Just throws a lot of suckers, you just cut them out. If you look down the line here around the corner, you'll see a tree that's been cleaned up. So that's what we're going to do. Let's get down to the business of actually pruning this tree. I'm going to make a series of saw cuts on this tree to thin out unwanted, overly vigorous branches. I'm going to start with this one here. I'm going to make a bit of an undercut. And then I'll make my top cut here. Put it on the ground. You can see, even though it's a foggy day, already we can see more light penetrating into the core of the tree, and that's good. We now need to make a couple of secondary cuts up here. Let me get my long arm pruner. Okay, let's follow up this tree here. Again, my goal is to reduce height and to open up the core of the tree. I'm going to prune this out simply because it's in the way. This is the branch I want to be the continuance of this branch here. Everything adjacent is going to be thinned out, especially the more upright and vigorous growths. And as I said, you can start to see this thing I'm referring to as visual resolution. Let me stop here for a minute, make a couple of little cleanup cuts, just so you can see it a little better. I'm going to do a little thinning of adjacent upright branches here. So what I want you to look at is to follow from down here. We thinned a big branch, we're going up, and we're going in this direction, and then we're terminating here in a weak growth. So I brought down the height, and I've opened up the tree left to right horizontally. Let's now deal with this section here. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make a series of thinning cuts, again, sometimes referred to as cutting to weakness. So what do I want? What do I want to keep? I like this branch. And so I'm going to thin this more upright, vigorous, interior facing branch. Again, you see that immediately there's more light in that vicinity. Sunlight is good. The old fruit grower pseudo haiku, the more sunlight you intercept, the more fruit you get. It's true. So this and this are the two, this and this are the two major wings of this. And so I've got a little more thinning to do. And when I get up here, I'm going to keep the weakest of all these shoots like that. Ending in a weak growth suits our purpose of slowing down growth. So we have an effective height of this tree in terms of its fruit productivity from about here down to here. But there is some importance to having a single extension of your lead branches. Yeah, I don't want this tree to be that tall, but by having those single shoots going up, it acts as a governor. It kind of controls or tamps down growth. If I were just to go whack, the tree will respond by going whoop, 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 grow a lot of vigorous shoots. So a nice outlet, a weak growth. Okay, we're moving around the tree. Let's look at this segment of the tree. I'm going to, again, thin this entire wing out. Let's do that. Again, it'd be more dramatic on a sunny day, but you can see immediately there's more sunlight infiltration in here. I'm going to come back and off camera and clean up this cut here, but we're good for now. And then we're going to look up this wing of the tree. For some secondary cuts. So I like this in its entirety, except for this upright, vigorous shoot here, and similarly here. That's good. When I come up here, there's not a whole lot that I like, but I do like this. I'm going to see if I can get this cut here. And then I'll use a lighter tool to thin everything except for this here. Again, the concept of visual resolution comes into play here. As you do it, you see it a little better, and you do that principally because you can see the amount of light that is entering into the lower canopy. You're really ridding yourself of two types of growths, that which is vigorous and upright, and that which is too close to each other. All right, so this branch comes up here and goes out there. We'll get back to this in a minute, and also comes out here. Nice horizontal spacing between these two wings here, but still a little too much. So I'm going to take these upright interior growing shoots and thin them. I'm good. So again, let's look, follow along. We come up, we fork, nice moderate weak growth coming out in this direction. And a little more vigorous, but still fruitful branch that's been trimmed up going in that direction. That's this segment. Okay, third time's the charm, the third section of the tree right here. Again, let's analyze and let's act. This comes up, forks here and here, and down here forks over in that direction. I like many aspects of this, not so much this. So I'm going to thin this out. Okay. So again, we've opened this up quite a bit. I like this as a young developing wing of this section of the tree. I'll just leave it alone, let it grow. It'll fruit up nicely for me. As I come up here, I'm still a little concerned about this being too tall and too much of a factor in creating shade. So I'm going to cut it to a weak growth. And so let's look at what we've got here again. We come up, we thinned, I'll clean this cut up, make it a flat cut. I've got a young burgeoning shoot here that will fruit for me but not be too vigorous. I got a little more vigor coming over in this direction, but I made a cut here to reduce the height. I now have this, and I'm going to thin one aspect of this, and I'm good to walk away. Let's look at this last section here. And I like, again, this as a young, this is like future considerations. A young shoot coming up and out that will be fruitful shortly. When I say shortly, I mean in a year or two, and probably keep productivity up for a decade or more. One last component of the tree here, this section. I like this coming up and out again into the light, but I'm going to simplify it by thinning a few upright growths off it. Yeah, nice, comes up and out. It's good, leave it. We come up here, and I'm going to thin this, which is overly vigorous and crossing, well, across the neighbor's line here, shading adjacent branches. And then even at that, I've got some more cleanup work to be done here to simplify this extension. And I think I'll just end it right about here. Boom, boom, boom. 3 extensions on 3 sections of this tree. We've reduced the height. We created greater spacing horizontally between branches and allowed a of a lot more light down into the core of the tree, which will result in quality fruit that's accessible and easy to thin and pick. We're in the home stretch. Coming down to the finish line here. Let's look at this section of the tree here. And I like aspects of this. And this is too tall, too complex, and going too much towards the center of the tree. There's a easy solution here. Whoop. There. Let's readdress this here and see if there's any minor cuts we want to make. Let me also point out that this is a general pruning session, a general reshaping, and one of the things about pruning trees, when a tree is young, you're forming its structure. When a tree is mature, you are reforming its structure, all with an eye towards light infiltration into the core of the tree. Okay, here, I'm going to let these ride more rather than less and just do a little bit of touch-up work. That is, if I have some vigorous shoots that may take off on me, I'll simply cut them back or thin them out. And again, this is not detailed work. I'm going to pretty much leave it at that. It's good enough for now. And so we've worked our way around the tree in the same fashion I did off camera on the first tree here. And now, more rather than less, this tree looks like the tree that I had done off camera. Granted, there are a few extraneous shoots you might want to remove, and go ahead and do that. This clarifies the picture a little bit. In truth, these could be done next winter at some future date. But resist the temptation to do every little nook and cranny, every little shoot. It's not the time to do that. And in fact, you need to be careful with fruit trees. It's full of care, of course. And that is, it doesn't matter summer or winter, this kind of cut, that kind of cut. If you do too many cuts on a tree in any one single pruning session, all bets are off. It is a stimulating activity and the tree will grow like crazy. So you need to be restrained.